Wipro Campus Interview Preparation. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a detailed preparation guide for Wipro campus and off-campus interviews across client delivery roles, internal finance teams, and investment JV functions. These may be expected questions which are gathered using web search and our personal database, so you can use this as a preparation material. But our suggestion is to go with other topics as well from our channel playlist. You can check timestamps in the description and jump to any question. Let's begin. How would you evaluate the financial performance of a multi-vertical IT services organization like Wipro? Sample answer. I start by analyzing revenue by verticals such as BFSI, healthcare, manufacturing, and cloud. Then I review utilization, on-site offshore mix, margin drivers, and project profitability. I also compare growth, deal wins, attrition impact, and currency sensitivity. Each vertical has different pricing and delivery economics. So, performance must be assessed at both consolidated and segment levels. While answering, include points like analyzing segment revenue, utilization trends, and margin drivers. What steps would you take to validate revenue recognition under fixed price and time and material contracts? Sample answer. For fixed price projects, I validate milestones, acceptance proofs, effort spent versus budget, and stage of completion logic. For time and material projects, I verify timesheets, billing rates, and approvals. I ensure IFRS 15 or Ind AS 115 criteria are met before recognizing revenue, while answering include points like checking milestones, reviewing timesheets, and validating acceptance criteria. Scenario: PMO reports show 90% completion, but only 60% revenue recognized. How do you reconcile this? Sample answer. I compare physical progress with financial progress. Sometimes PMO reports effort completion, while finance recognizes revenue only when deliverables or contractual milestones are met. I review effort burn, dependencies, client sign-offs, and whether any milestone was deferred. This helps explain whether the gap is operational or accounting-driven. While answering, include points like comparing progress measures, checking milestone timing, and validating client approvals. How do you audit billing, invoicing, and client acceptance in long-term IT transformation projects? Sample answer. I trace billed amounts to contract terms, approved SOWs, and accepted deliverables. I verify milestone letters, project status updates, and timesheets where applicable. I also test cutoff around month end to ensure invoices match actual delivery. While answering, include points like tracing to contract, validating acceptance, and checking cutoff. What procedures do you follow to evaluate cost allocation across geographies and delivery centers? Sample answer. I review allocation keys based on effort, headcount, square footage, or revenue contribution. I ensure the basis is consistent and approved. I validate whether shared costs like GBS, HR, and central IT are proportionately distributed across delivery regions. While answering, include points like validating allocation keys, checking consistency, and linking costs to usage. Scenario: resource utilization reports do not match billed hours. How do you investigate? Sample answer. I compare timesheet entries with allocation rosters. I check whether non-billable efforts, bench time, or training hours were included in utilization percentages, but not in billing. If gaps persist, I review PM approvals and system mapping issues. While answering, include points like comparing rosters, checking non-billable time, and reviewing PM approvals. How do you assess internal controls across large global shared service centers? Sample answer. I review access controls, ticket workflows, approval hierarchies, and segregation of duties. I test whether invoice processing, payroll, procurement, and reporting follow standard operating procedures. Shared services need strong governance due to volume and global impact. While answering, include points like evaluating workflows, testing approvals, and checking SOD controls. What steps would you take to review contract compliance for digital transformation and cloud migration projects? Sample answer. I verify scope delivery, milestone requirements, cloud usage obligations, and penalty terms. I compare actual work performed with the SOW and ensure change requests are formally approved. Compliance ensures both revenue accuracy and client satisfaction. While answering, include points like checking scope adherence, validating milestones, and reviewing change requests. Scenario: a client disputes milestone billing. How do you validate financial correctness? Sample answer. I verify milestone achievement with project artifacts like delivery documents, test results, and acceptance emails. I match contract wording with evidence. If partial achievement occurred, I evaluate whether partial billing is allowed contractually. While answering, include points like linking deliverables to contract, validating evidence, and reviewing billing rules. How do you analyze risks in outsourcing transitions for finance, procurement, or analytics processes? Sample answer. I assess transition readiness, process documentation, migration quality, and knowledge transfer risks. I also evaluate data privacy, continuity, and SLA risks. Financial impact arises when transitions delay, leading to penalties or cost overruns. While answering, include points like reviewing KT quality, assessing SLA risk, and analyzing cost impact. What procedures do you follow to audit Treasury operations for a multinational like Wipro? Sample answer. I test FX deals, borrowings, investments, and hedge effectiveness. I verify compliance with Treasury policy and check whether exposures are booked accurately. I also validate interest and FX gains or losses. While answering, include points like checking exposures, reviewing hedges, and testing cash flow accuracy. Scenario: a hedging position shows unexpected losses. How would you verify underlying exposures? Sample answer. I compare hedge volumes with actual payable or receivable exposures. I check currency, tenor, and pricing date alignment. If mismatch exists, it indicates over-hedging or incorrect mapping. While answering, include points like checking exposure mapping, validating hedge timing, and reviewing mismatches. How do you evaluate financial and operational performance of Wipro's investment joint ventures? Sample answer. I analyze JV financial statements, cash flows, product pipeline, and revenue traction. I compare actuals versus business case assumptions. I also evaluate governance quality, compliance, and capital allocation discipline. While answering, include points like reviewing cash flow, comparing with business plans, and analyzing governance. What steps would you take to audit valuation models used in JV or investment portfolio entities? Sample answer. I review model logic, discount rates, growth assumptions, and comparable company data. I validate cash flow forecasts with historical trends. I also test sensitivity to key inputs to assess valuation stability. While answering, include points like testing assumptions, reviewing comparables, and performing sensitivity checks. Scenario: investor statements do not match JV MIS reports. How do you reconcile? Sample answer. I compare revenue, expenses, equity contributions, and distributions line by line. I verify whether MIS uses management estimates, while investor statements follow GAAP rules. Mapping differences often explain the mismatch. While answering, include points like reconciling line items, checking basis differences, and validating adjustments. How do you assess effectiveness of financial controls in a rapidly growing digital and consulting business? Sample answer. I review controls over project contracting, pricing approvals, timesheet accuracy, and revenue recognition. Consulting businesses scale fast, so I test whether controls keep pace with new offerings and delivery models. While answering, include points like reviewing project controls, checking timesheet discipline, and validating pricing approvals. What procedures would you follow to verify accuracy of intercompany cross-charges across regions? Sample answer. I verify allocation logic, markup rules, transfer pricing compliance, and documentation support. I reconcile charges with the receiving entity's books. Cross-charges must align with OECD and local TP regulations. While answering, include points like checking allocation logic, validating TP rules, and reconciling books. Scenario. A delivery center shows high revenue but low profitability. What analyses would you perform? Sample answer. I compare billing rates, utilization, subcontractor costs, and location-based overhead. I analyze whether pricing was too aggressive or whether cost overruns occurred. I also evaluate project mix and on-site offshore ratio. While answering, include points like breaking down revenue versus cost, checking utilization, and analyzing pricing. How do you review integrity of financial data flowing from multiple ERPs and client tools into global systems? Sample answer. I evaluate data mapping, interface controls, reconciliation logs, and error reports. I test whether manual uploads or overrides are happening. Multi-ERP environments need robust validation to avoid misstatements. While answering, include points like checking interface controls, validating mapping, and reviewing exceptions. What checks do you perform to evaluate employee cost allocation for large delivery teams? Sample answer. I test allocation drivers such as role, location, project effort, and billing category. I reconcile payroll data with project-level cost reports. Misallocation can distort profitability of engagements. While answering, include points like validating drivers, reconciling payroll, and checking project mapping. Scenario. HR and finance headcount data do not match. How do you investigate? Sample answer. I reconcile joiners, leavers, transfers, and contractor conversions. I compare HRMS records with payroll and project allocation reports. Timing differences or incomplete updates often cause mismatches. While answering, include points like reconciling movement data, checking system timing, and validating mapping. How do you assess contract risks in cloud, cybersecurity, or application management deals? Sample answer. I review SLA structures, penalty clauses, data security obligations, and consumption-based pricing risks. I also analyze dependency on third-party cloud providers. These deals carry both financial and operational risk. While answering, include points like reviewing SLAs, checking data security risk, and analyzing consumption pricing. What procedures would you perform to validate third-party vendor bills for software, hardware, or subcontractors? Sample answer. I match invoices with POs, delivery notes, license entitlements, and timesheets. I check rate cards and contractual terms. I also verify whether the services delivered align with project requirements. While answering, include points like checking POs, validating delivery, and matching rate cards. Scenario. You find recurring manual overrides in procurement workflows. How do you assess risks? Sample answer. I review override logs, identify who approved them, and evaluate whether they bypassed price checks or vendor validations. Frequent overrides indicate weak controls, so I recommend tightening workflows and monitoring. While answering, Include points like tracing override logs, reviewing approval legitimacy, and identifying control gaps. How do you audit compliance with Ind AS, IFRS, or US GAAP across multiple countries? Sample answer. I review accounting policies for revenue, leases, business combinations, and financial instruments. I test compliance at entity level and check consolidation adjustments. Multi-GAAP reporting needs strict reconciliation. While answering, include points like reviewing GAAP differences, testing compliance, and validating consolidation. What steps do you take to evaluate enterprise risk management frameworks for Wipro and its investment JVs? Sample answer. I begin by reviewing the risk register, identifying how strategic, operational, financial, and cybersecurity risks are captured. Then, I assess risk scoring methods, ownership, and mitigation plans. I also check whether JV boards and Wipro leadership receive timely dashboards. Effective risk management depends on both identification and consistent monitoring. While answering, include points like reviewing the risk register, checking ownership, and analyzing mitigation effectiveness. Scenario. Project profitability dashboards differ from GL records. What is your approach? Sample answer. I reconcile project revenue, cost, and margins between PMO dashboards and the general ledger. I check whether timing differences, incorrect cost allocations, or unposted invoices are driving the mismatch. If system mapping errors exist, I work with IT and finance teams to fix data flows. While answering, include points like reconciling both systems, checking allocation accuracy, and verifying mapping. How do you analyze customer-level profitability and lifetime value in IT and consulting engagements? Sample answer. I evaluate revenue, discounts, delivery effort, subcontractor cost, and renewal likelihood. I also consider cross-sell potential and long-term TCO benefits for the client. Customer-level profitability matters more than project-level profitability in consulting businesses. While answering, include points like analyzing revenue versus cost, evaluating discounts, and assessing long-term value. What procedures do you follow to audit cloud hosting costs and SaaS consumption models? Sample answer. I match cloud invoices with usage dashboards, check resource tagging accuracy, and review chargeback logic. I verify whether inactive resources were deprovisioned. SaaS consumption must align with contract entitlements. While answering, include points like matching usage with invoices, reviewing entitlements, and checking optimization. Scenario. Cloud billing spikes suddenly for a major client account. How would you analyze it? Sample answer. I break down the spike by service type, such as compute, storage, bandwidth, or licenses. I check whether auto-scaling events, new environments, or misconfigured resources caused it. Then I validate whether contractual limits were breached. While answering, include points like breaking down cost drivers, checking misconfigurations, and validating entitlements. How do you ensure IFRS 15 or ASC 606 compliance for bundled IT, cloud, and managed services contracts? Sample answer. I identify distinct performance obligations, determine transaction price allocation, and validate timing of revenue recognition. Bundled contracts require analyzing each component, implementation, cloud subscription, and support to avoid premature revenue. While answering, include points like identifying obligations, allocating price, and validating timing. What steps do you take to evaluate business continuity and disaster recovery readiness in global delivery centers? Sample answer. I check DR plans, data backup frequency, failover testing, and alternate site readiness. I assess whether critical processes like payroll, billing, and security operations can run without disruption. I also review RTO and RPO targets. While answering, include points like checking backup plans, reviewing failover tests, and evaluating critical processes. Scenario: a cybersecurity audit reveals gaps in a client account Wipro manages. How do you assess financial impact? Sample answer: I evaluate potential penalties, SLA breaches, cost of remediation, and loss of client trust. I quantify additional security investments needed. If exposure is high, I escalate to account leadership for immediate containment. While answering, include points like assessing penalties, estimating remediation cost, and evaluating client impact. How do you validate investment appraisal models used by Wipro Ventures or JV investment arms? Sample answer: I check cash flow forecasts, comparable company multiples, and assumptions around market size, growth, and exit potential. I recalculate valuation using sensitivity analysis. Early-stage investment models rely heavily on assumptions, so validation requires skepticism. While answering, include points like testing cash flows, reviewing comparables, and performing sensitivity checks. Underscore: what procedures do you follow to evaluate impairment for goodwill and intangibles arising from acquisitions? Sample answer: I identify cash-generating units, test recoverable value using value in use or fair value, and validate assumptions like discount rates, churn, and margins. I compare current performance with acquisition forecasts to identify impairment triggers. While answering, include points like validating CGU assumptions, comparing with forecasts, and checking recoverable value. Scenario: a newly acquired subsidiary reports unexpected losses. How do you identify the root cause? Sample answer: I compare actual results with acquisition due diligence assumptions, analyze revenue gaps, and check for integration issues. I review project profitability, attrition, client renewals, and cost overruns. Sometimes post-acquisition losses arise from cultural or operational mismatches. While answering, include points like comparing with deal assumptions, analyzing revenue shortfalls, and checking integration issues. How do you evaluate internal audit effectiveness across IT services, consulting, digital ops, and investment divisions? Sample answer: I assess coverage breadth, frequency, quality of findings, and closure rate. I check whether audits capture emerging risks like cloud, AI, cybersecurity, and venture investments. Effective internal audit adapts to business complexity. While answering, include points like checking coverage, assessing closure, and reviewing alignment with new risks. What steps do you take to validate data privacy and GDPR compliance in client engagements? Sample answer: I check consent records, data processing agreements, encryption controls, and retention policies. I ensure cross-border data transfers meet GDPR requirements. Non-compliance can lead to severe penalties, so controls must be verified end-to-end. While answering, include points like checking DPAs, reviewing encryption, and validating retention logic. Scenario: client KPIs do not match internal KPI dashboards. What reconciliation would you perform? Sample answer: I compare data definitions, calculation methods, and reporting timelines. I validate source systems and check whether both sides use identical filters. KPI differences often arise from inconsistent tagging or time period cutoffs. While answering, include points like comparing definitions, checking time periods, and validating data sources. How do you evaluate risks in outsourcing critical finance processes to AI or RPA automation? Sample answer: I assess bot design, exception handling, access rights, and audit trails. I check whether automation covers only rule-based tasks and whether overrides are monitored. Financial impact arises when bots fail silently or produce inconsistent outputs. While answering, include points like evaluating bot controls, checking exception handling, and reviewing audit logging. What procedures would you follow to review SLA performance and penalty computations? Sample answer. I validate SLA metrics such as turnaround time, accuracy, uptime, or response time. I compare actual performance with contractual benchmarks and recalculate penalty amounts. I verify whether penalties were correctly billed or waived. While answering, include points like validating metrics, recalculating penalties, and checking contractual rights. Scenario: a client account manager raises concerns over margin pressure. How would you break down contributors? Sample answer. I analyze billing rates, utilization, subcontractor cost, on-site offshore mix, and overhead allocation. I check whether scope changes or client discounts reduced margins. A structured bridge from gross margin to net margin helps identify the root cause. While answering, include points like analyzing utilization, checking pricing, and reviewing subcontractor cost. How do you assess compliance with SOC 1, SOC 2, or ISO audit requirements for delivery centers? Sample answer. I test access controls, change management practices, data processing accuracy, and physical security. I ensure evidence aligns with control objectives stated in the certification standard. Non-compliance impacts client trust. While answering, include points like testing access, checking change control, and validating documentation. What steps do you take to validate shared services pricing for internal finance support functions? Sample answer. I review cost allocation basis, markup policy, service catalogs, and benchmarking with external BPO rates. I check whether pricing reflects actual service consumption by each business unit. While answering, include points like reviewing cost basis, validating markups, and checking fairness. Scenario: you detect duplicate vendor codes or suspicious vendor master changes. What actions follow? Sample answer. I trace change logs, identify the user responsible, and validate whether approval workflows were followed. I freeze the vendor temporarily and conduct a detailed vendor ledger review. Vendor master integrity is essential for fraud prevention. While answering, include points like checking logs, reviewing approvals, and performing deeper vendor checks. How do you evaluate project governance frameworks for large digital programs Wipro executes? Sample answer. I review steering committee structure, escalation paths, risk logs, sprint planning, and dependency tracking. I check whether governance integrates finance, delivery, and client teams. Strong governance prevents overruns. While answering, include points like reviewing committees, checking risk logs, and validating escalation mechanisms. What checks do you perform when auditing FP&A outputs like budgets, forecasts, and rolling plans? Sample answer. I review assumptions behind revenue, billing mix, utilization, attrition, and margin. I compare forecasts with historical performance and validate whether cost estimates are realistic. FP&A must be both analytical and grounded in actual performance. While answering, include points like checking assumptions, comparing with history, and validating realism. Scenario: actual costs exceed budget in a consulting vertical. How would you investigate? Sample answer. I analyze overspend by cost category: employee cost, travel, subcontractors, or tools. I validate whether change requests were approved or whether scope creep occurred. I also check utilization shortfalls and pricing mismatches. While answering, include points like breaking down cost overruns, checking approvals, and reviewing utilization. How do you assess synergy realization and financial performance post-merger? Sample answer. I track synergy KPIs such as cost savings, cross-sell wins, delivery consolidation, and shared tool adoption. I compare actual results with synergy forecasts. I validate whether integration milestones were achieved on time. While answering, include points like tracking synergy KPIs, comparing forecasts, and reviewing integration milestones. Scenario: you are managing financial reviews for multiple client accounts under pressure. How do you ensure accuracy and prioritization? Sample answer: I begin by ranking accounts based on revenue size, client sensitivity, and deadlines. I create a structured review checklist covering revenue, cost, margin, utilization, and risks. I block time for review cycles and maintain constant communication with account teams. Prioritization ensures accuracy, even under pressure. While answering, include points like ranking priorities, using structured checklists, and coordinating proactively. Thank you for watching, and if you liked our video, kindly press the like button and leave us a comment. This will help us reach a wider audience.